Bala, welcome to the Lessons in Leadership series from Citizens News. Now that's Citizens with the Z-E-N-Z news.com. So every now and then we identify thought leaders in various areas, and this, as you know, is an area of that's both dear to your heart and mine. The subject of democracy in the workplace, and I would really love to hear first how you came about this unusual view, because you are quite unusual in the positions that you take. I've never come across anybody else uh, quite so articulate and quite so passionate about democracy in the workplace. So I am really curious about how it all began, what the contributing factors were.
Okay. I would say there are two sets of influences. One is the influence of my upbringing, the kind of values with which I was raised, intellectually very committed to that. And there were other, I guess, so the politics was a subject which was discussed in the party, in the family, dining table and all that. So from my childhood, whenever I visited my grandparents' place and the other cousins and all that came, one of the subjects which was always, there was a lively interest in politics and what was happening in the country and in society around us. So that I naturally would have colored my and influenced my perceptions of what how society should be run on fundamental rights, on democratic processes and things like that. So that was one set of influences. The second set of influences was, flowing from that was the fact that I think by nature, I grew up in both my school education and in college, where I was a fairly active member of the Students' Union and, took an interest in what was happening there, though not to the extent of, I was very studious, but I took a lively interest in activities of the Students' Union. So I think there was a general bias in me for this consultative way of working, this a way of working which involved getting other opinions in evolving a consensus. Of course, I had very strong views of my own on most subjects, and I used to do my best to persuade others to come around to my way of looking at things. But that's what made the whole thing more interesting when I realized that there were so many other different ways of looking at problems. And so that was the second thing. And the third aspect was that even after, as a young government official, I found that I benefited a lot by asking the others in my office or in my department for inputs into decisions. So while, so what emerged was a very, was a method of working which served me well, which seemed very sensible. And I didn't do it for any tactical reasons, because that was just the way I was to ask people what do they feel we should do and how we should do it, etc. So when I came to becoming an entrepreneur, setting up my own business, it seemed very natural for me to continue the same way of working there. So management decisions were not fatwas which were handed down as if they came from divine inspiration or, or things like that. But they always were the product of consultation, discussion. Of course, like I said, I did have very strong views on many subjects, so I liked the argument. I liked the challenge of trying to convince others if they felt very strongly that, very differently from the way I felt, etc. So all this was of a piece. And as a result, when it came to the issue of, about trade unions, I didn't even give it a second thought. In the sense, it was not an issue which I really lost any sleep over. I just thought, I remember telling my colleagues in that when we were a very little company with hardly 30, 40 employees, and those days, I think the law was if 15 people, 15 confirmed regular employees could form a trade union. So at that time, when there was some apprehension about that, I said, why are we getting worried? Because this is a right which is enshrined in the constitution of the country. And if it is a right which the constitution feels obliged to protect, surely it cannot be something which is anti-social or anti-national or is going to work against our company's interests. So I said, I'm not even losing any sleep over it. And in fact, what we did is we went to the other extreme. I called the then labor commissioner, a young IAS officer, and I asked him, could you take a class for our first batch of 15 confirmed employees on their rights, on the Factories and Boilers Act, on the Industrial Disputes Act, and also on how to form a trade union, if they feel like it. And so there was a lot of astonishment, both in the labor department also when I approached them with this. But my idea was that, see, look here, if we don't tell them this, they will go and ask some fellow standing in the street corner, and they will get a very biased and one-sided view from that guy. Instead of that, why don't they hear it from the labor department itself, so that they can hear it from the horse's mouth, as it were, and get the facts and all that. And what is interesting is, I think it took more than a year and a half, I think it took after that class was held before they formed the union, actually. So it wasn't as if they ran out immediately and formed a union. So,
well, looking back, even looking back, I'd say it was a very gutsy thing you did. And most business people would not do what you did. So kudos to you for having had the foresight to do that. So we're going to transition to the next.
Can I just make one response to this?
Yes.
To this, I think it's very interesting that what you mentioned about saying that it required a certain kind of courage and all that to do this. So I think it is precisely that kind of positioning, that perception, and you're right about it. It was an unusual thing to do, but for the perception had sunk in so deep. And I don't believe that it was actually based on any objective study of the data. So in other words, perception really was driving the stereotype of the trade union means it is something which is not good for, and so sensible entrepreneurs or managers should do everything in their power to discourage or break the trade union if it already exists, or discourage it from forming if there is no trade union at all. So I believe what happens, what follows is that an inordinate attention therefore is directed to something which doesn't deserve that attention, because the real challenges before a business remain the same, whether it is in the US, whether it is in India, or whether it's in China. That is, the trinity of business is cost, quality, and delivery. If your cost competitive, if your quality is good, and on the delivery side, you are a reliable supplier, this is the Trimurti of business anywhere in the world. Nowhere is it mentioned trade union. I don't see any mention of a trade union anywhere. I don't see, it's like as irrelevant as how big your factory building is, what is the name of your company, all those things are irrelevant. It is this trinity which matters for a company's success. And I think it's high time business people both in Kerala and the rest of India realize nobody is going to come and buy your product because you say, I have no trade union. Nobody is going to buy your product because of that.
Thank you, Bala.